Journeys Ahead, The Song of Serpents. Chapter 4, Screw Prophecy. Written and narrated by T.S. ProArt. Rushing behind Coco with tiring breaths, both Void and Nock hustled their way across soaking mud, jungle leaves, and clumpy muck puddles. Meanwhile, the frog above was quickly flipping and jumping from each tree like some kind of ninja. Her elegance was unmatched, and unlike anything Void or Nock had seen before. "Coco!" The spark bellowed as he coughed mid-stride. "Slow down!" Nock chimed in as he did his best to not slip and fall. "We're almost there. Just a little bit further now," the frog girl replied as she took a hard lunge and hold of a vine, proceeding to swing forward to an upper hill in the short distance. "I really wish people didn't have to make life difficult," Nock babbled whilst giving Void a stern side-eye. "Tell me about it." The spark snapped back as they both found the hill and quickly began to ascend. Climbing and slipping upon its steep slope, the two friends managed to get to the top, where Coco was standing and looking back with a rushed sense of worry. Could have waited a moment, kid. We're injured here." Void groaned as he cracked his neck. "Plus, I don't really appreciate the vagueness of your words. Could you at least explain some of it? Anything?" The panicking spark inquired as they all craned their gaze down to what was instantly taken as a beautiful sight. Not too far off below the hill was a massive crater of sorts that curved into a slope. Within this divot was what appeared to be a medium-sized, bustling little village. A bunch of houses and huts looked to be made out of mushrooms and trees with either red or blue wooden materials, whilst having farm crops and ponds as well. Past the crater was a massive cliffside that overlooked the vast sea of jungle and terrains. On the cliff's ledge, at the back of the town, was a massive wooden lodge or Titanic-sized cabin that oversaw it all. It was quite breathtaking to the other two. "I'll tell you what I know, but the grandmother will explain it better than I ever could," Coco babbled before rushing down the hill and towards the community. Void ran alongside Coco, while Nock struggled to keep up. "Look, I don't know the exact details off the top of my nip-nop, but if Naja called your friend a vessel, then he's already one step into a plan that we all thought to be rubbish." Hunching down, the spark began to cough once again in a hard, pained wheeze. Hearing this, Coco stopped as well as Nock, who both went over to the spark with worried eyes. "Whoa, are you okay?" she asked. Wiping his mouth once more, Void craned his sights back upon Coco before nodding his head. I'm fine. Continue." Gently nodding, Coco turned back to the village that wasn't too far off before explaining once again. "Listen, to make things short, if your friend is what he called a vessel, then he's going to use her to begin a prophecy. A very scary prophecy." Coco finished while looking over her shoulder. "Prophecy?" Nock asked as he adjusted his bent and cracked glasses. Nodding towards the two, Coco sighed with tension before looking back to the village, now more worried than ever before. "Come on then," was the only thing she could say before leading the two forward once again. "Prophecy?" Void quietly asked as he and Nock began to follow. Within due time, Void and Nock, as well as Coco, found themselves entering the mystical village. The moon above shimmered down upon the community that was surprisingly active during the late hours of the evening. However, that didn't compare to the actual villagers themselves. A mixture of both frog and axolotl-type people looked to the passing trio, some nodding, some waving, while others were more curious than anything else. All wore similar robes to Coco as they went about their business. Some tend the crops, while others traverse between huts and homes, carrying foods, tools, and other basic needs that one would have. In a way, it was quite intriguing for both Void and Nock. Void wasn't too taken aback. He had been to many worlds, seen many sentient beings, so a couple of frogs and axolotls were pretty tame in his eyes. Nock, however, could have been told that staring was rude. "Welcome to my village. We call it Bournemouth. If you follow me, I'll take you to that big hut in the distance. That's where the grandmother will explain everything." Coco affirmed with a sporadic hand gesture while pointing to the massive lodge. With a furrowed brow, Void continued to follow the frog, while Nock trailed slowly behind. As he did so, the mechanic looked to his side and was met with the sight of another frog lady, this one older, pushing a stroller. Within its little carrier was a bunch of water that held a baby tadpole-like creature. Its skin was black, but had enormous yet adorable eyes that made up about 40% of its little body. "Aw," Nock said with a wave towards the baby, only for it to suddenly wail with a cry in return. Awkwardly, Nock turned away from the child and quickly caught up with both Void and Coco, while quietly apologizing to both the infant and the instantly annoyed mother. "Come on, almost there, hip-hop!" The frog cried as she began to bound up a set of stairs leading to the massive wooden lodge. Grunting and following suit, Void and Nock ascended the stairs as well, slowly but surely making their way to the top. As they climbed, they took in the details. The lodge was built to almost look like a large cabin. Orange lanterns lit the exterior as vines along with other plants dangled and grew from the walls. It almost looked to be a greenery from the outside. Sharp red and striking colored wood lined up and down for all three to see, as it almost glimmered purple within the moonlight. Small frameless windows went up and around, making things feel a tad more roomy, per se. The hint of a warm fire was glimmering through the cracks, giving off a very cozy sort of feeling. At the top, there stood a massive set of wooden doors that Coco was rapidly ascending towards. However, as she did, Nock from behind suddenly let out a sneeze. "Achoo!" He cried out with a forward lunge in his body. "Bless you," Void quickly replied as he gazed to his little buddy, who was now readjusting his glasses. "Ugh, thanks," the mechanic replied while wiping his flat nose. With a grunt, Coco pushed with all of her might and opened the doors. As they swayed into the orange opening, she turned her head and beckoned for the spark and mechanic to follow. "Come on," she said before taking a long leap and lunging inside. Landing and sliding across the smooth silkwood flooring, Coco rose both her webbed hands up to her mouth before shouting, "Grandmother! It's Coco! It is urgent!" Slowly walking in from behind, Void and Nock both turned and gawked upon the interior of the Great Lodge. Massive fireplaces rested within wooden mixed stone walls. Large chandeliers dangled above with melting chrism candles, while animal skins and rugs lined along the floor and seats that all connected into what looked to be a large community center. It almost looked like something out of a medieval setting, mixed with that of Old Norse. "Cozy," Void mumbled as he made a full 360 turn. "You could say that again," Nock added with a small sniffle. "Coco?" A tender voice called from above. All turning, the three below set their sights upon a massive stone stairway that was lined with torches upon its rails. This ascending formation led to an upper floor that was marked by what looked to be a beast's skull above. However, it wasn't the skull that was to be taken of note. Rather, it was that of a very tall woman standing upon the step's top. With what had to at least be 10 feet, stood a tall and lanky yet gorgeous-looking axolotl-like creature. Donned in white and yellow robes, this axolotl looked to hold the stance of wisdom and courage. As opposed to pink skin, hers was that of gentle yellow, being topped with a pair of beady, glistening eyes. Like any other axolotl, she of course had an array of gills that sprouted around her head. However, hers were much larger and longer, donned in jewelry and all types of beautiful gems. Authority was high with this one, and Void and Nock seemed to already figure who this was. "Grandmother, come quick, quick!" Coco cried as she began hopping up and down with a sporadic form of motion. Reaching down and taking the lower half of her dress, the tall axolotl gently lifted it up and proceeded to descend the steps like a princess from a fairy tale. As she made it to the main floor, the grandmother turned her attention upon Coco and asked in a worried tone, "What's the matter, young Coco? Are you hurt? Are you okay? Who are you two? Trailing off, tall Axolotl craned her gaze from the young frog, then towards Void and Nock. The mother then fell dead silent as her eyes locked upon the spark. As this happened, Coco and Nock turned to follow the mother's gaze, while Void couldn't help but feel a tad bit awkward to the expression. For a long, quiet moment, Void and the Axolotl held what was an uncomfortably long stare, as her eyes seemed to grow bigger with a slowly drooping mouth. Hi? Void greeted with an awkward wave and smile. Blinking with a slow shake in her head, the grandmother released a soft and pent-up gasp before gently reaching out her webbed hands towards Void. Wincing, the spark felt the slippery tips of the axolotl's fingers caress the sides of his cheeks in an almost comforting hold. He wasn't sure what was happening, nor did Nock or Coco, who had stared on with a baffled set of gazes. Coco looked to speak, but wasn't sure if she would intrude on this odd moment between the two of them. No. Do my eyes deceive me? The grandmother asked, as her and Void continued to look into one another's souls. I mean, it's not every day someone sees a cyborg, I suppose. Void jokingly replied to try and make the situation less strange. With eyes furrowing and mouth quivering into a shocked smile, the grandmother let go of Void's head and clasped her hands over her heart, before exclaiming aloud in a shocked tone, You're Spock! With those three words meeting Void's ears, he craned his tilted head back upright with surprised eyes. The axolotl, this quote-unquote grandmother, had just called out his people's name. Just like Naja, this being recognized him in a sense. Not him per se, but what he once was a part of. The people that had been lost to time. Wait a second, you knew my people too? Void asked as Coco and Nock looked back and forth between Void and the mother. That's a spark? Coco whispered towards the mechanic with a slight lean, leaving Nock to just shrug and shake his head. A long time ago, yes. One day they were here and the next. The grandmother replied before looming down in silence. I thought they had all been lost. Who are you, Sparklet? What is your name? The axolotl asked as she knelt down to be eye level with Void. Crossing his arms, Void took in a short breath before replying. Void Novason. Perking up with wide eyes again, the grandmother looked to almost explode with some type of joy. Shaking her head, the axolotl stood back with slight chuckles that were constricted by what sounded to be a loving sense of shock. Void Novason? Son of Nova and Celeste. Shaking his head, Void rose his arms ever so gently in front of himself, feeling taken aback by it all. She knew his parents? What was happening, he thought. Yes. Did you know them? Void asked as the axolotl turned to meet the spark's gaze. Did I? Kiddo, me and your mother were friends. I was there for your birth. The grandmother revealed, throwing Void through a ringer of emotions. He had never seen anything like the grandmother, never heard of a name being mentioned. All he could do was just stare in awe and shock by what he was hearing. By the gods, you're all grown up. You're alive. Are there others? Are your parents? Novason, where Coco, you were correct. This is an urgent matter. We must prepare you a meal. Are you cold? Are you hurt? Goodness, what has happened to you, child? The mother rambled as she brushed the shocked spark off. Grandmother, that's not the urgency here. Coco finally spoke up as she stood next to her tall leader. I didn't even know he was a spark. Looking between Coco, then to Void, and now a baffled Nock, The grandmother rose an eyebrow before standing back to her full height. "I beg your pardon, young one," the axolotl asked as Void slowly collected himself and marched forward. Listen, with all you just said, I'd love to talk, but we need your help. Coco said you could explain some stuff." Void began with a worried tone in his voice. "Oh, of course. What's the matter, Sparklet? I assure you, whatever you need, I will do my best to help," said the grandmother, as Void took in a long breath. "Their friend was kidnapped by Naja. They say that he called her the vessel," Coco chimed in, cutting Void off before he even spoke. Eyes widening like saucers, the large axolotl whirled her head towards Coco and then back into Void and Nock, with sudden fear taking over her soul. What?" she cried out as her gills looked to shake. "Holy shit! Can one of you please, for the love of God, just explain what that means?" Nock cried before marching forward. "Listen, I'm sorry if this comes off as rude, but me and my friend here have had our asses handed to us by this, whatever it's called, the Constrictor Clan. They kidnapped my sister, aka Void's best friend, to this world, leaving us to not just fend for ourselves, but get dragged through by little to no information as to what the hell is going on!" Nock snapped, throwing his arms down with clenched fists. "So, could you please, for the love of God, someone, anyone, explain what the hell is going on?" With stunned eyes, both Coco and the grandmother stared in awe at the little man, who looked to almost explode from rage. Slowly, Void walked up and placed a calming hand on his shoulder, before looking back at Coco and the grandmother with tired and worried eyes. "Please, can you explain what he wants with her? All we want is to get her home safe." Clasping her hands together and standing back at full height, the grandmother took a deep breath with a nod before turning in a slow gesture. "Follow me," she said while making her way towards another stairwell, this one leading to a lower sector of the lodge. Looking at one another, Void gently smacked the back of Nock's head for being a tad rude, but he couldn't deny that he wanted answers too. Together, all four began to trek forward and descend down a flight of stairs that was lit brimly with green teal torches. Descending downwards, the group of four found themselves going through a spiral stone stairwell that was daubed in fancy bricks and cobblestone. A sense of warmth had been carried within as the grandmother began to speak with a collected and stern voice. "I see that you and your friend are in need of an explanation, Sparklet. I apologize for my sudden excitement. I had thought all sparks perished." Nodding, Void completely understood her words, all the while wondering to himself just how and why she knew the sparks, let alone his parents. "It's alright. We can talk later. But please, what's going on?" With a small nod, the grandmother and everyone else made it to the bottom of the stairs, entering into what Void and Nock quickly realized to be a large library of sorts that spanned a good way off into the distance. "Naja's a demkunk. It's the first thing you should know," Coco blurted while crossing her arms. "Language, Coco. But yes, Naja is quite the case," the grandmother continued as they began to trek their way through the dimly lit library. "You see, many, many years ago, a war broke out upon Ophis. Naja and his Constrictor clan, with us and our people, we call ourselves the Ripples," the axolotl explained while brushing her hand along a shelf of books that passed on by. "The war was one for that of control. Naja wanted to take hold of the northern sector when he already had control of the southern side. Childish and brash, that snake. He wanted to expand his empire, for not just Ophis, but to other realities as well," the axolotl revealed, spiking Void's and Nock's curiosity. "Tyrant snake, huh? That checks out." Void chimed in as he gazed up to the beautiful axolotl that glimmered within the light. "Indeed, as we Ripples began to lose, Naja's actions caught the wind and attention of your people, the Sparks. They came to our world to aid us in our fight, the grandmother revealed while looking down the void with a smile. That also checks out. The Sparks always held tabs on the Omniverse and its events. That was before settling down in... Is that how you met my parents? Void asked with a slight smile. We fought side by side, me and your mother. She and your father weren't even a couple by the war's end. When I tell you your mother took the fight to Naja, she really went all out, sliced his arm clean off upon the battlefield. Upon hearing this, Void and Noct eyed one another as their minds flashed back to Naja's floating ghost arm. However, after the war, someone close to Naja died in battle, that someone being the only person that gave an ounce of compassion within the tyrant. That was his queen. Turning a corner, the four of them entered themselves into a large dome room, filled with curving bookshelves that stretched to a marble top. Naja went insane after her death, became obsessed with prophecy that would supposedly reunite him and his love together again. The grandmother continued as she turned to face Void and Noct. A prophecy? Elaborate. Void asked, crossing his arms. With a sorrowful gaze, the grandmother craned her head upwards towards the marble roof, seeming the gesture for Void and Noct to do the same. As their eyes locked with the ceiling, they bear witness to an array of images, murals and cave drawings per se, with one massive, intriguing image in the very center. What looked to be two giant snakes were going around in a cracked circle. One snake looked to have long hair poking from its back, while the other was more slimmed. One had a crescent-shaped eye, and the other was that of a sun. One had a beard, and the other with a sharp chin. They had been going around in a circle and looked to eat one another's tails. It almost looked like an Ouroboros effect, however, with the snakes eating each other instead of one. And then, the mother began again. Before the countings of time itself, there were two primordial gods, the fire serpent, Warnog, and the gem serpent, Yaru. The grandmother said, pointing to the mural. One fateful day, the two primordials crossed paths, Warnog teleporting through constellations, and Yaru stationed within our reality. Once met, they quickly fell into a deep and passionate love. Curiously, Void gazed upon the murals as his mind began to create images to what the gods could have looked like. Big and strong, short and lanky. It was hard to tell by the old images, but he was curious nevertheless. Together, they forged the world as we know it. Our home, Ophis. Together, the serpents cared for our planet, raised it as though it were an offspring. With their showering love, our tribe, Naja's tribe, as well as other life blossomed from their tender love that they held to one another. A true creation of peace, I suppose. Looking down the Noct, Void saw the small mechanic scratch his chin in deep thought as he too listened to the strange tale. Over time, however, the serpents' love for the world grew to split them apart. They grew possessive in a sense, and struck within their own mindsets. Eventually, this terror turned into a split, and caved the two of them into a war for control. Warnog wanted us to have free will, while Yaru sought us fit as playthings. Looking down with sadness, the grandmother brushed some dust off a nearby book podium, while Void and Noct couldn't help but await the next bit of the story. Once the world they once held dear was damaged from their mighty battle, the two snakes were too blinded by their views to see what they had been doing to what they had made. Because of this, something needed to be done. To stop this apocalypse, an ill warrior from the shadows forged a magic sword from the beast's divine blood, smelting and crafting the blade of Sleek. The grandmother explained as she looked to a sword that had been mounted upon the wall, leading the Void, Noct, and Coco to look upon it as well. It was an old-looking weapon that was donned in a black steel from hilt to blade. Using this weapon, The warrior with a magic spell used the sword's divine power to banish the serpents. The tyrannical, yet freewheeling Warnog was chained into the sun, and the broken, desperate Yaru into the moon. From that day forward, our home was saved by a sliver of a hair. However, the ill-fated warrior soon warned of a prophesied fate by the sword's call, for with gods, things are always tricky. The grandmother said in a somber tone while looking at Void. I know that all too well. Odin and his Aesir? Tricky fellows they are. Void chimed in, reminiscing on a glitch expedition that took him to the Nine Realms just a few years ago. Indeed, Sparklet. This prophecy called that if a marriage, a combined love of a powerful fire sealed with that of a star-forged energy, if they were to mix on the 12th moon cycle, at the 12th hour, this act of compassion would break the spell seal and awaken the hearts of both Warnog and Yaru. Something about those words made Void perk up. Powerful fire, he kept repeating within. Once awakened, the gods are said to finish their fight, and in turn, destroy the world. It is said to be their final choir, the Song of Serpents. However, it is said, or rather, it is partially written, that another warrior dawned with an illness shall rise and finish the beast off once more in a glorious flame of sacrifice. But, as you could probably tell by what I just said, that last bit is up for speculation as, well again, prophecy is a tricky situation. Before Void or Nock could speak, Coco came in with her own set of words that continued the story to where they were now. It's said that in the final days, when we are to die in the battle, we are to reunite with the ones we hold most dear. Naja's grief had been felt across Ophis in many ways, and he has been determined to bring upon the apocalypse just to see his queen again. Coming back forward, the grandmother began to speak up with a stern tone. Naja is one of the few remaining descendants of Yaru's side of creation. He has been around for many years. He's a demigod, dear friends, stricken with grief and insanity to be reunited with his true love. Coming back around again, Coco looked upon the concerned Spark and Mechanic before continuing. Years back, Naja found remnants of Warnog's blood within a lake. Using its energy, he cast a divine spell from ancients past and sent a wave of Warnog's cosmic fire into the multiverse, in hopes that it would latch upon someone. Coco revealed, instantly making Void and Nock snap their heads to what she had just said. Naja is that of Starforged energy, Yaru's energy. His plan was to hopefully embed someone with Warnog's energy in hopes to enact this wedding of sorts, to free the beast and destroy everything. Does your friend wield such flame? Coco asked as Void began to breathe in hard as a sense of looming dread lashed around his soul. Wait, so let me get this straight. That snake sent a wave of cosmic fire into the multiverse in hopes it would just embed itself into someone for that? Void asked as he pointed to the mural above. Love can make people crazy, Sparklet. Dare I say, insane. The grandmother explained before looking away in sorrow. By Matira, her name's Jida. She and my friend here, their city, was struck by a meteor shower of cosmic fire. She got her abilities, teleportation, flaming blast. Are you telling me that was forced upon by a grief-stricken snake? Void demanded to know as his face began to furrow with rage. If that's the case, then that technically means that Naja killed her family. Nock whispered before taking a seat on the floor, lost in thought. He's responsible for her powers, all the lives that were lost in the Night of 1,000 Flames. All for damn prophecy? Void weakly exclaimed as he gripped his head. Oh, Jida. Oh my god. Leaning down, the grandmother placed a hand upon the Spark's shoulder before speaking with a caring tone of voice. The 12th moon cycle was one night away. If you and your friend here are to work fast, You could still save her. Hope is not yet lost. Looking back up, Void swallowed hard before shaking his head. He needed a moment to think. So much information had been dropped on his head. It was almost too much to bear. What was once thought to be a freak accident was some sick, unorganized attack that was sent in by a blind direction. All for prophecy? Glancing to the grandmother, Coco, and then to the blade of Sleek, Void grunted with a furrowed brow and turned to leave the room. Screw prophecy. We're getting her... Falling over onto his hands and knees, Void began to wheeze and hack once more. The venom within was getting worse. He knew it to be true. His limbs ached and his head burned within. It was all way too much to handle. It was as though every time he got frustrated, his soul would burn eternally. Sparklet! The grandmother cried as she, Coco, and Nock quickly helped him back up. We gotta get them to the healing pond. Fast! Coco exclaimed as they all helped Void walk. The Spark was tired, in need of healing, and for much needed sleep. However, all Void could think on was what everything had led to. He wouldn't let that prophecy come true. Whether or not it was stated in fact, they had to get Jida back, no matter the cost. About an hour or so had passed since the revelations. Grandmother and Coco had guided both Void and Nock to a healing pond that was within the upper sector of the lodge. It was more like an indoor pool in a way, one that was built from the remnants of a pond's mossy exterior, while having a giant glass dome surrounding it and the whole room itself. The moon above shimmered bright upon the glowing blue batch of liquid, as both Void and Nock sat within its confines, essentially using it as a bath. Nock sat awkwardly on one side, wearing only his underwear, while sitting about neck-deep in the liquid. Void on the other side, however, still sat fully clothed. The water that touched them felt like an antidote. The soreness in their bodies seemed to fade, as the water, whatever it was, loosened their joints and healed the scratches on their bodies. However, the bite wound remained upon Void's neck, and still ever so gently burned. Thanks to the pond, however, it didn't hurt as bad. Do you always bathe with your clothes on? Nock asked, while his head looked like a fishing bobber in the water. Opening one eye, Void gazed upon the mechanic and shrugged his shoulders in response. No, I'd just rather not undress when sharing a bath with my friend. Void said before leaning his head back and looking at the stars above. Many twinkled and others flickered with life, leaving Void to simply ponder everything that had happened. I can't believe what they told us. Void then mumbled as he slightly sunk his shoulders into the shallow water. You're telling me? Nock replied as he joined Void in looking at the stars above. I just gotta refresh myself here. Correct me if I'm wrong. The mechanic suddenly began as he placed both his hands together in a prayer motion, proceeding to point them down as he listed off what he needed to say. So, Naja went to war for some multiverse control. Sparks came in and helped the ripples, resulting in Naja's queen being killed. Out of love and grief, he cast a spell using Warnog's cosmic fire out into the multiverse to hopefully embed some unfortunate soul for a ritual. That soul ended up being Jida, and waited years for some reason to finally arrive, kidnap her for said ritual wedding, snakes destroy the world, in turn granting some salvation for all those that perish in it. Nock finished, sounding confused with his own set of words. That's the complicated gist of it, I suppose. Void added as he rubbed water upon the side of his neck, being lost in his own world of thought. What I don't understand is why they waited so long to come and take her. It's been almost 12 years now of her having that fire. Why wait so long? Nock asked as he splashed some water on his face. Looming back at the mechanic, Void mimicked his motions, but this time over his head and horns. If I were to take a guess, maybe they learned it worked after she jumped worlds. With those proper movements or some kind of calculation, it could draw many eyes to beings in the Omniverse. Perhaps they were just waiting for that the whole time. Or maybe they're just dumb. Void theorized as he scrubbed his arms with the nice warm healing water. For me, though, it's still a lot to take in. Cosmic fire resides in many things, so I always pondered as to how or what caused the Night of 1,000 Flames. But the essence of a fire god? That's the last thing I could have thought of. Void finished, now washing his face. No kidding, but I know for a fact that Jida will gloat about it. Getting powers from a god is complete bragging rights. Nock added as he washed his bald head. Smiling, Void slowly stretched and got out of the pond, however, sitting on the ledge and keeping his mechanical feet inside. She would totally gloat about that. Yeah. Void sadly expressed before holding on to the orange necklace around his neck with tender care. We should have stayed together. The spark gently stated with a saddened expression. I should have gone with you guys in saving the civilians. But no, I was blindsided by other things. I didn't even make it to the portal. And now we're here. Void beat himself up with a deep form of regret. It's not your fault, Void. You couldn't have predicted any of this. Nock tried to comfort as he too sat on the ledge of the pond, across from Void, and placing his glasses back upon his head. Sighing, Void decided to fully stand out of the water and begin the air dry. He definitely felt physically better, but not mentally. It is, though. If I had been there by your sides, none of this would have happened. I should have. I just hope she's okay. Void blurted before sitting back down and looking at the moon above, wondering if the snake goddess was truly embedded within its form. Sighing and grabbing a towel made from animal fur from the ground, Nock wrapped himself up while taking another and heading over the Void. I do too, Void. I do too. The mechanic replied as he dropped the towel over Void's shoulders. I won't let prophecy defy us, Nock. Jida once told me that we have the ability to write our own stories. We're going to get her back, without this world's destruction. I won't let it come to that. Void added as he looked to his small friend, who took a seat beside him. Prophecy in literature is just a bunch of hogwash anyways. It's never truly written in fact. It's just the events that are supposedly meant to happen. But only if the characters allow it. The mechanic mentioned as they both now stared at the moon above. Yeah, I know. Not sure if you heard earlier, but I once had a run-in with Odin and his family a few years ago. Those guys are all supposedly destined to some prophesized fate, but nothing happened as of yet, as far as I'm aware. They're just a bunch of dicks, if anything. Raising an eyebrow to this, Nock side-eyed Void before asking, So, you mean to tell me Norse mythology is an actual thing out there? Smirking with a soft shake in his head, Void shrugged before replying with a, Yeah. I scared Thor by throwing a snake at him. Told him it was Loki stuck in animal form to get him off my tail. Before you ask, I was stopping a glitch in the 9 realms, and the Aesir thought I was a threat. I could go on for hours, but... Raising his hand, Nock placed it on Void's shoulder before saying, Save it for when we save Jida. I think she would very much enjoy a tale of yours more than I would. Smiling, Void nodded and looked to the ground, seeing his reflection in the glossy wood that surrounded the healing pond. It was then Void asked something aloud that he would normally do with Jida. Riddle me this, Nock Rogers. What gets wetter the more it dries? Void inquired as he looked back towards the mechanic. In a confused stare, Nock stared upon Void while adjusting his glasses, unsure of what to answer with. A towel. Void answered as he took the cloth from around his shoulders and began to dry himself off. Why did you ask me a riddle? Nock inquired as the spark cleaned himself off. They're fun. Helps clear the mind. You should ask Jida when we get her back. Void replied with a tired but present smile. Sure. Nock returned as he looked to his clothes that laid upon the side of the pond. I'll meet you downstairs. Didn't Coco say she and the grandmother had hammocks for us to sleep in? Nock asked, referring to a passing mention while they took Void to the healing pond. I caught wind of it before you all hurled me in there, Void mentioned as he completely dried himself off whilst pointing to the pond. If I'm out by the time you get downstairs, I guess this can be a proper good night this time, Void said before turning on his heel and heading back down the steps towards the lodge interior. Alright then. Good night, Void. I'll see you in the morning, Nock said as he waved the spark off, who waved back before slowly descending downwards. As Void traversed through the now quiet lodge, he couldn't help but feel that ever-present guilt within his soul. That feeling. That damned feeling began to punch him again. The burning sensation he had no idea what to call. All the spark wanted was for her to be safe, to be reunited with her at the end of the road. Walking upon an outdoor balcony, Void found 2 hammocks that had been strung up and around a gentle glowing set of plants with blankets on the inside. Coco and the grandmother were nowhere to be seen. They treated them right for this night. Sighing, Void climbed himself into one of the hammocks that overlooked the village. People were now beginning to tune in for the night, and Void figured that it was finally time for some rest. Tomorrow, he and Nock would venture to Notch's southern sector and end things properly. They had till the next night to stop this. But then again, would that be enough time? Looming up within his hammock, Void began to ponder whether or not prophecy would come true. The serpents were gods, but gods tend to lie. What about that so-be-told ill warrior? That was such a random detail for it to be thrown into the fray. None of it made sense. But then again, since when did prophecy ever make sense? Is what Void told himself as he shut his eyes to sleep, all the while holding on to Jida's necklace, falling to a deep and well-needed rest. Awakening to the sound of some kind of siren, Void cracked open his view to a foggy, almost gray morning atmosphere with a tired and albeit disgruntled grunt. Mist and slight rain trickled down across the lands that were now noticeably full of villagers, scrambling and panicking. Upon seeing this uproar, Void quickly rose up from his hammock, while Nock, now on the other side, did the exact same thing. Rubbing his eyes, the spark threw his blanket off and slowly stood upon the balcony deck. Hey, what's going on? Nock asked with a sneeze as he rolled and fell off the hammock, hitting the balcony with a hard little thud. I don't know, Void replied before placing his hands on the guardrail and focusing his sight upon the now foggy village. Villagers had been running out from the mist and heading into the Great Lodge with a fearful state. Void could see below as they ascended the steps and barged their way inside. All the while, a warning siren continued the blast. It was almost like a tornado alert, sharp and stinging with a shrill cry. It made both Nock and Void wince. Suddenly, coming in from the back with a loud door slam, Coco ran herself towards both Void and Nock before exclaiming, "Hey, you two inside, hurry!" she demanded whilst jumping and flailing her webbed arms and hands. Looking over their shoulders, both Void and Nock looked upon Coco with confused eyes. The ripple appeared petrified, panicked, and concerned. All of this made Void realize that whatever was happening, it wasn't good. Coco, what's going on? Void asked in a tense breath, but before she could answer, the sound of someone yelling came aloud from the fog. Turning around, the three locked their eyes upon a lone axolotl man sprinting towards the Great Lodge. However, before he reached the steps, something horrific happened. Shooting out from the fog came a long, slimy, and slender tongue that lashed itself around the man's waist and proceeded to quickly yank him back into the mist. The man didn't even have time to scream, for his cries were suddenly silenced by a loud, sickening crunch that was hidden from sight. In reaction, Coco covered her mouth, and Nock simply let out a short yelp from the sight. Void, however, stood firm with a look of feared determination. The man was just eaten by something, and that something slowly began to emerge from the fog. Crawling in the view came a large and disgusting shaped monster. It was as though King Kong and Godzilla fused to form some kind of disgusting looking hybrid. Being the size of a house, the monster crawled forward with 3 sharp dagger-like hands that were pushed on by 2 back legs. The head of the beast was as if it were a pug that had been merged with that of a frog. A scrunched face with knife-like teeth, topped with milky white eyes that looked and examined the area. As it did so, a nasty, scaly ridged tail smacked upon the ground with a loud plop. The most unique thing of note was that upon its grayish-green back sprouted several dorsal plates that glimmered with a puncturing red haze. Smacking a hut over to its left side, the beast stood upon its hind legs and released a sickening roar into the air. As what sounded to be a scream from the damned pierced the land, it sent a shiver down Nock and Coco's spines, leaving the young Ripple to explain what they were looking at. It's called a skin ripper. They're giant pests that just love to attack villages. They'll pass once they realize food is nowhere to be found. The lodge is our safest. Before Coco could finish, Void huffed with a quick, "Don't worry, I got this," and deployed his cracked battle mask over his face. Without warning, the spark hurtled the guardrail and dropped to the ground below. "Void!" Nock cried as the spark landed and quickly advanced upon the beast. Deploying his Nova Blades that shimmered bright within the rainy morning haze, Void kicked off the ground, heading right for the Skin Ripper. "By the gods, he's gonna get himself killed! Is he stupid?" Coco asked as she rolled her head to Nock, who simply shook in response. "No, he's insane!" As the Ripper turned to face the approaching blue object, the beast only caught a glimpse of the spark for a moment before the sensation of burning hot blades plunged themselves deep into the side of its thick neck. Opening its mouth, the massive beast bellowed a titanic-sized roar that caused Void to wince from its almost sonic vibrations. Reopening his eyes, Void huffed and quickly swung himself to the top of the creature, performing a similar move to when he fought the glitch-possessed tower. Clasping his hands and blades together, the spark got ready to drill into the monster, but the Ripper, in a quick form of motion, smacked the spark out of the sky, sending him crashing into a nearby hut. Grunting, the spark ragdolled through the structure before exploding out to the other side. Landing hard with a wet splash, the spark grunted in a puddle before spitting out one of his back teeth. "Ow! That was ow there!" Void groaned as he craned his gaze back upon the monster that was already advancing upon him with its tongue at the ready. Thinking fast, the spark shot both of his arms forward towards a house behind the monster. Taking hold of its porch, the spark retracted back forward, sliding right underneath the now leaping Ripper. Once on the back side, the spark quickly got back upon his feet and released a cocky taunt. "Nice try, Kermit," the spark yelled before releasing a round of rockets from his chest into the now turning beast. Striking upon its back in a devastating flame, the Ripper howled as chunks of its dorsal plates broke off and fell to the soaking mud below. All the while, both Nock, Coco, as well as the other Ripples watched from the Great Lodge as the spark took on the monster. Whirling itself around with a wail, the Ripper released a heavy croak before suddenly expelling a blast of red, acid-like poison from its bowels. "Oh boy!" Void shouted before flipping himself out of the way and letting the house behind him take the full hit of the blast. Landing back down, Void deployed his right hatchet and proceeded to swing it around, and then launch it towards the Ripper. With his hand still clenched around the handle, Void allowed his arm to stretch with a throw all the way till the blade lodged itself into the hide of the monster. Using this, Void recoiled himself forward again, now towards the beast, and delivering a powerful kick upon its right eye. As the Ripper cried out in rage, Void began to deliver punch after punch upon the monster's face, in hopes to either subdue the creature or kill it right then and there. "Sorry to inform you, big guy, but people are not on the menu," Void cried as he prepared to plunge his now right-activated blade into the creature's eye socket. However, before he could, the Skin Ripper quickly shot out its tongue and took Void by the waist. Before the spark could react, the massive animal yanked him off its body and then slammed him hard upon the ground, causing Void's mask to fully shatter and dissolve back into energy to begin a long self-reconstruction. The beast then swung Void again, sending the spark back first into a dense set of crops. People within the lodge began to gasp in shock as Void was repeatedly slammed back and forth, causing him to grow a tad disoriented within the moment. After what felt to be 10 or more painstaking slams, the Ripper decided that it was time to have its meal. Retracting his tongue, the beast brought Void to its maws to feast. But the spark caught the monster by its clamp just before he became breakfast. Using his legs, Void pushed back against the lower jaw, while using his hands to push up against the roof of the mouth. The creature's breath smelled foul, spicy even, but in the worst way imaginable. Rows of dagger-like teeth lined the back of the beast's throat that would have ripped any form of prey upon swallowing. This in turn made the spark both fearful and a tad angry to the situation. What big teeth you have! Guess that's why they call you skin rippers, huh? Void nervously grunted as he struggled to keep the monster's mouth open. We gotta help him! Coco cried as she unsheathed her staff and took a leap off the balcony, taking Nock with her in the process. Wait, what? Oh god, no! The mechanic cried as they landed to the world below. Back in the beast's maws, Void continued to grunt and push back as the monster continued to attempt at eating the multiversal being. The spark within was now beginning to grow tired. It felt as though the entire world and its monsters were now just targeting him and the people he cared about. Had been the most action he had felt in a long time, and it hadn't even been a full day. Void was slowly losing his cool now. So much was happening, yet it all involved unimaginable horrors. He wouldn't let some beast chew him up, not when that snake had Jida in his grasp. Jida, Void said again. Nausea. That snake. Furrowing his brow, Void began to breathe heavily. His muscles began to tense with that feeling arising once more. Nausea. Void growled under his breath as something hot began to grow from his soul. His bite wound began to burn, and his horns had started to shimmer green. Jida. Nausea. Void grumbled as he closed his eyes. Jida. Nausea. Nausea. Kills her. A voice suddenly said, deep within the depths of Void's subconscious. Opening his eyes, Void released a massive blast of rage-filled energy. A large, electrical, and venomous gust of power erupted from not just his horns, but his entire body, launching both him and the Ripper away from one another. Upon seeing this sight, both Coco and Nock stopped and watched as the beast recoiled with a roar, while Void fell back to the ground, however, flipping through the air as he did so. With a smoke trail behind him, the spark landed hard upon his feet with a large splash. A heavy downpour had begun to erupt and drench those outside. However, nothing could take away the scene from Void, who to Nock and Coco's shock looked different. Slowly standing back to his full height with a hunched posture, Void held his arms out at each side, both visibly having a new form of weaponry that slowly grew outwards. Emerging from the spark's arms came a pair of long and sharp burning green blades that curved in a backwards angle. They looked to be as large as the spark's entire abdomen, spitting with a burning green hue and white electricity, a stark contrast to Void's normal blue and white energy. Everyone then watched as Void's blue clothes slowly began to change hues into a sickly green-gray. His head and arms also changed color to this unhealthy shade of color, just barely taking over the entirety of his blue, only leaving small hints of it on his body. The spark's veins could now even be seen to burn with shades of lime, pulsating and shining shades of color underneath his normal and biomechanical skin. Surges of electricity then buzzed across the spark's body in quick flashes. It's as though Void's form had been struggling to comprehend this power, as if it were almost combusting the work within. Raising his hands, the spark could see that at the tips of his fingers and thumbs emanated out lime green talons of energy or claws. What the? He wordly whispered before taking notice of his arm blades that glinted green off the rain. What is this? He spoke again as he looked to his color shift within the puddles beneath, reflecting back the sickly new form of power that the spark didn't understand. What just happened to me? Void asked himself before looking back up to the monster, whose face was now halfway burnt. Looking over his shoulder, Void met the shocked gazes of both Nock and Coco. As they looked upon the spark, they could see that Void's eyes were now burning with that same green shade as his veins, with 2 visible fangs protruding from his mouth. "Get out of here!" The spark shouted as the sounds of the monster began to approach once more. Void didn't know what was going on with him, but he had to act fast if he were to get the monster away. Whatever was happening to him could wait. The ripples were still in danger. Rolling back forward, Void took a deep breath and rushed at the beast, instantly feeling a surge of burning energy that both hurt and yet felt oddly incredible. Leaping forward, Void found himself go further and faster. His body felt as though to be a feather in the air, as the world seemed to almost slow around himself. "What the hell?" he asked himself with an almost echoed back tone. Reaching out, the beast wanted to claw the spark downwards, but Void, in reaction, swung his strange blades in return, curious to see what they were capable of. As Void swung his arms both left and right, the arm blades looked to almost extend in length, growing further but almost slimmer in motion. As they struck the Ripper's hand, Void watched in shock as they cut right through with ease. The limb was like butter to his knife, and the beast howled in raged pain from its sudden blow. "Whoa!" Void shouted as he flew past the arm and towards the beast's face. Clenching his fists, the spark began to throw fast punches and powerful strikes that sent the beast recoiling back from each blow. Its teeth flew out of its mouth, while chunks of its rock-like skin broke off its face. The spark was in disbelief to what he was doing. This energy, this powerful yet painful surge of energy, felt as though to give him strengths that were only described in superhero tales. "What is this?" Void roared before kicking the beast square in its lower chin and flipping back down to the ground. All the while, Nock, Coco, and many others watched in both shock and amazement as to what was happening. All except for one. For the grandmother, who now watched from the steps of the lodge, looked to be in a state of fear and horror. With an anguished roar, the Ripper shot its tongue out once more, in hopes it would capture Void again. However, the spark felt his senses heighten in a sense. It was as though his reflexes reacted faster than time itself. For as the tongue approached, he reached out and caught it by its bulbous tip. Digging his emerald-glowing claws into the tongue's flesh, Void grunted and yanked with all his might, completely tearing the strand of flesh out of the beast's body. "Hymetira!" Void whispered in shock as he dropped the now limp tongue. The beast from afar now wailed in a horrified cry. Stumbling and clutching the interior of its mouth, the monster stared upon Void with a newfound sense of fear, before suddenly turning on its heel and fleeing back into the fog with a heavy set of bounds. Just as quickly as the skirmish started, it had ended. Watching the monster flee, Void breathed in hard before muttering out a set of words that seemed to slip out in an almost unintentional sense. "Better run," is what came out before he suddenly crumbled to his knees. Falling to the puddle-ridden ground, Void began to violently cough and wheeze in a splitting form of pain. The power he had felt quickly faded and was replaced with what he could only describe to be an afterburn. His lungs cried and his limbs shook. It had been unlike anything the spark had felt before. As Void practically wheezed his lungs out, he suddenly felt both Nock and Coco aid him. Gently, they brought the spark back to his feet as the green aura slowly faded from view. His blues and whites began to revert to normal, while the mystifying blades upon his arms disappeared from sight. "Void, what was..." Nock asked, while villagers as well as the grandmother approached in a surrounding formation. "I don't know." Void groaned as all the pain focused back upon his unhealed bite wound. Reaching up, the spark took hold of it and groaned once again, until the grandmother suddenly blurted aloud, "You have been bit." Turning, Void, Nock, and Coco looked upon the grandmother as she stared upon the spark with visible fear and worry clouded within her eyes. "Naja bit you, didn't he?" Raising an eyebrow, Void stood to his full height and approached the grandmother with tense eyes, before asking, Yeah, he did. Was that caused from him? Void asked as the large axolotl knelt down to be eye level with the last of the sparks. Nova-san, you've been infected with both a gift, yet a terrible curse, said the grandmother as she looked into the spark's eyes with unbridled fear. What's that supposed to mean? Void asked as the mother shook her head from side to side. Oh, dear boy, what you just experienced, what you enacted upon was rage. A rage that burns within both Naja's fury and the unresting, angered soul of the goddess Yaru. The grandmother revealed, leaving Void to tilt his head. Naja's venom is no ordinary venom. To any mortal being, it would have killed them. But your spark-like nature can comprehend the power that is Yaru. Shaking his head, Void looked back at the baffled Nock and Coco before returning his sights to the axolotl. What are you saying? Naja gave me snake powers or something? He asked with a stern expression. Void, Naja's venom is Yaru's venom. You have the power of a god coursing through your veins. It is a power that will grant you strength in battle. However, it has one fatal catch. Reaching out, the mother placed her hand over Void's bite wound and looked down in a sense of sorrow. Nova-san, if you are to use this power again and again, the venom will corrupt your soul more and more. If you are not careful, if you do not control your rage, you will die from it. Shaking his head and stepping back, Void rose his hands out before retorting. I'm sorry. What? He asked with a worried face that screamed for answers. Wait, so let me get this straight. You mean to tell me that what I just did came from some divine, lethal venom? Void asked, leaving the grandmother to nod. Yes. During the war, Naja bit and infected many sparks. I've seen what it could do. If they used it too much, they would just drop dead. The grandmother explained, before closing her eyes and lowering her head. What do you mean he's gonna die? Nock asked, rushing the Void's side. Only if he continues to use its power. A day's worth in the healing pond should eradicate the venom in his soul. If we don't have a day. Void interrupted as he clutched the bite wound. That ceremony. It's tonight, right? I can't. Void found himself stumbling in his words. Death was a concept that didn't necessarily bother him before, but now, he knew he had people that relied on him, and vice versa. He had used the venom twice now. He was still alive, but noticeably worse off. His skin was now just a tad greener, while he himself felt sick within. However, if he were the heel in the pond now, Jida, Ophis, everyone in it would meet their own little type of Ragnarok. I'm stronger than I let on. I'm sure I can control it. Just gotta avoid getting mad or overusing my powers, I suppose. Void said with an uncertain face as a cold sweat poured down his brow. Yaru was the more aggressive one, so her spiritual essence would require a bit of flair, I suppose. Coco added as she approached as well, sheathing her staff upon her back. I don't like this, Nock said, looking the Void with a set of caring eyes. I don't like any of this. Nock babbled as he placed his hands on the back of his head in deep thought. Grandmother, what is the safest route to Naja's location? If using my powers to ticking myself off in any way means I pose a threat to my well-being, what should I do to avoid conflict? Void asked with a worried stare. A mile ahead, there's a train station that runs on its own supply route. It will travel you to Naja's fortress by the first crack of night. It'll be your best route in any case. The grandmother explained, pointing off towards the southern direction. I can be their guide. I found these dingledorps. I take it that it's my responsibility to help them out. Coco exclaimed before pulling both Void and Nock into a hug, their faces pressing against Coco's, who stood defiant in the middle. "I'll keep you both safe. You can count on Coco," she exclaimed while eyeing Void down, in which the spark couldn't help but nod in a silent form of thanks. "Very well. As long as you get your friend out of Naja's clutches, this world will be safe, as well as you, Sparklet," the mother said before gently rubbing his head. "You know, that stubbornness and call to action of yours, you're just like your mother, Void. Even when facing death in the eyes, you choose to help those instead of yourself. She would have been proud of you, Sparklet." Gently smiling to this, Void nodded again before turning to look south. As he did, the villagers all cleared a path that led the way towards where they needed to go. Void could see the thankfulness in their eyes and the trust they all now shared. It made him feel a tad bit more positive in the moment. "Come on, let's go save us a friend," Coco cried as she ran forward, leading the way. "Good luck. And remember, don't give in to the rage," the grandmother said before stepping aside. "Of course. Thank you," Void said before he and Nock began to follow behind Coco, albeit slower than before. As they walked after the frog, Nock tugged upon Void's arm, causing the spark to look down with a curious gaze. Looking back at him, Nock gave a very tense glare before speaking softly. "If you start feeling off, let me know. I'm worried sick for you right now, man," the mechanic blurted, leaving Void to simply nod again. "I will. I've been through worse," Void said in return, leaving Nock to furrow his gaze. "I'm serious. If we lost you, if Chida lost you..." Nock trailed off, leaving Void to wrap his arm around Nock and pull him close upon his side. "That won't happen. I'm getting both you and Chida home, and I'll be right by your sides," Void finished as they trailed after Coco, who patiently waited for them by a pathway connected to a tree line. "Come on, let's go rescue your sister," Void finished as the three adventurers disappeared into the misty rain. Although Void was optimistic, he couldn't deny that deep down, he was scared for his own well-being. All the while, the small voice creeped itself into his ears, whispering in a cold chill.